Somewhere around 80, people started speaking to me in a different voice, and it took me a year to work out what to do about it. I'm Walter, 82, retired carpenter, 9 years on my own since I lost my Helen. If anybody said, "How are we today?" in a voice they'd use on a child, you know what this is. Start with number 1 and stay for number 4 because that's the one nobody names. Number 1. The voice. Bright, slow, and about a note and a half higher than the one they'd use on anybody else. You'll know it immediately. Everybody past about 78 knows it, and I've never once heard it discussed. It goes, "And how are we today?" Or, "There we go." Or, "Aren't you doing well?" The words aren't the trouble. It's the tune. It's the exact tune a decent person uses on a 4-year-old, and it arrives from a woman of 30 who means nothing but kindness and who would be mortified if you told her. First time I properly registered it, I was about 79, at a counter in Bangor, and a young woman said something to me in that voice, and I stood there for a second not knowing what had happened. Here's what I do now, and it is the whole of my technique. I answer in my own voice, lower than hers. Slower, ordinary, I say something perfectly plain. The weather, or what I've come in for, in the voice of a man who has been talking to adults for 65 years. And about 8 times out of 10, she comes down to meet me inside a sentence and a half. That's it. No correction. Nothing said about it. Most people are matching without knowing they're matching, and if you give them something else to match, they'll take it. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number 2. They ask the person you're with. This is the one that gets me, and it's the one I've had to work hardest at not being sharp about. My daughter Susan is a nurse, and she comes up from Boston when I've got anything to do that she thinks wants 2 people. And more than once, in more than one place, somebody has looked at her and asked her a question about me while I was standing right there. Does he need a hand with that? Is he all right on the stairs? What does he take? I'm 82, not absent. Now, I want to say the fair thing first, because I've had a good while to think about this and I've come round on it a fair bit. Some of that is arithmetic and not contempt. A woman working a desk somewhere sees a great many old people, and a proportion of them genuinely cannot manage the question. And she has learned, badly, but she has learned, that going to the younger person is quicker. She's not deciding I'm gone. She's playing the odds she's seen, which is still wrong, and it's a good deal more forgivable than it feels in the moment. So here's what I do, and it took me a while to get it right. I answer. That's the whole of it. I don't correct anybody, and I don't say anything about being spoken over. The question was about me, so I answer it plainly before my daughter can. And Susan, bless her, and this took a conversation between us, has learned to wait about 2 seconds before she says anything, so that I've got room to. That 2 seconds is the whole intervention, and I'd say it to any son or daughter watching. When somebody asks you a question about your father while he's standing there, count 2 and let him have it. Because if you answer, you've confirmed it. Not deliberately, but the fellow at the desk has just had his approach validated, and he'll do it to the next old man as well. And if your father answers, in his own voice, about his own business, the whole thing corrects itself in about 4 seconds, and nobody has had to be embarrassed. Now I'll say the harder half, since I've been generous. There's a version of this that happens inside families, and it is a good deal worse than the one at a desk. 3 people in a room, and 2 of them discussing what the third one is going to do. About his house. About his winter. About whether he ought to be driving. He's in the chair. He can hear every word. I've been in that room. Not often, and not lately, and my children are good ones. But it happened at that kitchen table 3 years ago for about 4 minutes, and I remember it perfectly. And what I did was nothing that day, because I couldn't think what to do. What I'd do now is what I'd tell anybody to do. I'd say, I'm right here. Ask me. 4 words, and there's no heat in them. It is not a rebuke, and it stops the whole thing instantly. And I have used it twice since, and both times the conversation got better inside of a minute. Now I have to say the thing I'm least comfortable with, because I'd be a hypocrite otherwise. I did all of this, every bit of it, for about 50 years. My mother went into a place in 1986, and I arranged the whole of it, and I sat in rooms with people and discussed her while she was sitting there, and it did not once occur to me that anything was wrong with it. I talked past her. I asked questions about her over her head. I very likely used that voice, because everybody did in 1986, and nobody had ever suggested otherwise. She never said a word about it. She'd been a schoolteacher's daughter, and she was 78, and she sat in that chair and let her son discuss her arrangements with a stranger. I've thought about that a great deal since I turned 80, and I cannot go back and fix it, and there is nobody left to apologize to. So when a young woman at a desk does it to me, I have got no standing whatever to be affronted, and that has done more for my temper than anything else I could have worked out. The difference is that somebody could have told me, and nobody did. That's the whole of it. Nobody in 1986 said, Walter, ask her, which is why I say it out loud now, at 82, to whoever's watching. Not because I'm owed anything, because I did it for 50 years and nobody stopped me, and I'd have stopped if they had. Before the next one, tell me in the comments how old you were when you first noticed people talking to you differently. Just the number. I'd be very interested to see the spread on that, because I'd guess it varies a great deal more than anybody thinks. I read every single comment, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. Number 3, everything you do becomes an achievement. You're doing so well. Look at you. Good for you. I hope I'm like that at your age. I get some version of that perhaps twice a week, and I want to be clear that every single person saying it means it kindly. Not one of them is being unpleasant. They think they're paying me a compliment, and in their own terms they are. But sit with it for a minute. Doing so well against what? That's the question, and once you've asked it, you can't stop hearing the answer. The compliment only makes sense if there's an assumption underneath it that a man of 82 ought to be in a considerably worse state than I'm in. The praise and the low expectation are the same sentence. You cannot have one without the other. Nobody has ever said good for you to me for carrying wood. They said it when I turned 81, about carrying wood, having watched me do it for 40 years without comment. Same wood. Same man. Same load. Now, here's how I handle it, and I've changed my approach on this one twice. For a while, I used to deflect. Oh, it's nothing. Any fool can carry wood. And that's worse, because now we're both discussing my capabilities, and I've made it into a subject. Then for a while, I said nothing at all, which reads as offense and isn't fair to somebody who meant well. What I do now is I say thank you, plainly, and then I ask them something. That's the whole of it, and it's the most useful trick in this entire talk. Somebody says you're doing so well, and I say thanks, and how's that boy of yours getting on at school? Because the compliment puts me in the position of the specimen, and a question puts me back in the position of a person, and the second one overrides the first every time. They're not doing it on purpose. They're doing it because at some point in a conversation with an old man, a good many people cannot think of anything to say, and they reach for the nearest kind thing. Give them something else to talk about, and they'll take it gratefully. Half of them are relieved. Now there's a cousin of this one that I'd not have thought worth mentioning until a fellow at the diner brought it up. Everything an old man says gets sorted into one of two boxes. Either it's wisdom or it's confusion. There is no third box. Say something ordinary, an opinion about a road, a remark about a fellow on the radio, and it will be received as either profound or as a sign of something. Nobody just takes it as a thing a man said. I'd not have believed that until I started watching for it. Now I see it most weeks. Say something a bit sharp, and somebody will laugh in a particular way and tell you that's very true, in the voice you'd use about a saying on a wall. Say something they don't follow, and you'll see a small flicker of assessment go across a face. Both of those are the same thing. It's a man being listened to as an example of an old man, rather than as a fellow with a view about the road commission. And I've got no clever handling for that one, I'll be honest. It's the one on this list I've made least progress with. The best I've found is to stay concrete. That's all I've got. Talk about specific things. This road, that job, the wood, the price of a thing you bought on Tuesday. Because a specific statement is harder to file as either wisdom or confusion. The general statements are what gets sorted. Say something about life and you'll be filed. Say something about a hinge and you're just a man talking about a hinge, which is a poor sort of freedom. And I've taken it. And it has made my conversations a good deal more ordinary and more enjoyable. There's one more thing under number 3, and it's for anybody who works with old people, since I know some of you watch these. You are not the enemy here, and I want that said plainly. I've been in and out of enough waiting rooms and shops and one hospital in the last 5 years to have formed a view. And the view is that the people doing this work are mostly doing it well and with almost no time. The voice and the compliments come from somewhere, and it isn't contempt. It's a person who has 30 seconds and 11 more people to get through and has learned a way of being warm quickly. If I could change one thing, it wouldn't be the tone. It'd be the direction. Say it to me rather than about me, in whatever voice you've got, and I'd not care about the tune at all. Now there's a fourth pattern I'd fold in here rather than give a number of its own, because it belongs with the compliments. The volume. People shout at me, not all of them and not always, but a fair few, and my hearing is perfectly serviceable. I can tell you which way the wind's coming from at 2 in the morning by which window rattles. And I'd say the same as I said about the desk. A good deal of it is arithmetic rather than assumption. If the last 4 men your age that somebody dealt with couldn't hear, the 5th gets the volume as a default, and that's a habit rather than a judgment. What I do is answer at an ordinary volume, same as the voice, and most of them come down. And when they don't, when it's plainly the shouting sort, I say, I hear you fine, thanks, pleasantly, and once. And that's the end of it. That one's easy. Actually, it's the only one on this list with a clean solution. Because deafness is a fact, and facts can be corrected. The others are all about assumptions, and assumptions don't correct. Then there's the sentence finishing, which is the one that riles me most, and which I'd guess riles a good many of you. You start saying something, take half a second to find a word, and somebody supplies one. Nearly always the wrong one. That's the maddening part. They'll give you a word that isn't the one you wanted, and now you've got to either take it and be misrepresented, or refuse it and make a thing of it in the middle of your own sentence. And I want to be fair again, because this one is done by people who love us as much as by strangers. It comes from an impulse to help. Somebody sees you searching and hands you something, the way you'd pick up a thing a fellow dropped. But a word is not a dropped thing. A man searching for a word is a man doing a piece of work, and the work is his. Here's my handling, and it's the plainest one I've got. I keep going. I don't take their word, and I don't argue with it. I simply carry on and put my own word in when I get to it, over the top of theirs if I have to. Sounds impolite written down. It isn't in practice. It takes about a second and a half, and the conversation doesn't notice. And I'd say to the sons and daughters again, give him the 4 seconds. He'll get there. He got there for 60 years without your help, and the word he's after is better than yours, because it's his. There's a variant of it that's worse, and I'll mention it because I've had it done twice. Somebody finishes the sentence and then agrees with the version they invented. That's a small thing that leaves a mark. You've now been recorded as having said something you didn't say by somebody being kind, and there's no way to unpick it. That doesn't sound like an old man being difficult about nothing. I've stopped unpicking those. Not worth it, most times. But I've noticed I say a good deal less to the 2 or 3 people who do it habitually, and I'd not have predicted that. You simply talk less to somebody who rewrites you, which is worth knowing if you're on the other side of it. Every time you finish an old man's sentence for him, you are buying his silence in small installments, and you will never once see the bill. And I'd say to anybody who's just started noticing all this happening to them, you are not imagining it, and you are not being oversensitive. I spent about a year wondering whether I'd gone thin-skinned in my old age. I hadn't. It's real. It's very nearly universal, and almost everybody doing it is a decent person with no idea they're doing it. I'd also say that I did about 2 years of being offended about it, which is the natural first response, and which I'd recommend to nobody. I went about slightly braced, waiting to be condescended to so I could resent it properly. Collecting instances the way a man collects grievances, and I could have given you a list at the time. And what that produced was a sour old fellow who was worse company than he'd been the year before, which gave every person who met him considerably more reason to handle him carefully than they'd had at the start. That's the trap, and I sat in it for 2 years. The offense produces the very thing it's offended by. So I gave it up, not out of grace, but because it was making my week worse. And everything else in this talk is what I found on the other side of giving it up. Number 4 now, and this is the one I promised you. Stay with me. Number 4. Remember I said number 4 is the one nobody names. Here it is. People stop disagreeing with you. That's the one. That's the one that cost you. And I did not notice it happening for about 3 years. Here's what it looks like, and it looks like nothing. I say something. Somebody nods and says something pleasant, and the conversation moves on. Every time. About everything. I could tell you at 82 that the town ought to do something about the road commission, or that a particular way of framing a wall is wrong, or that some fellow on the radio has got it backward, and whoever's in the room will say something agreeable and will go on to the weather. 20 years ago, half of those would have started an argument. A proper one. Bob would have told me I was talking nonsense about the road commission, and we'd have gone at it for 20 minutes over coffee, and both enjoyed it enormously. Now everybody agrees with me. All the time. About everything. And I want to tell you what that actually does, because it took me years to work it out, and it's worse than it sounds. First, it means nobody is talking to you. Agreement is what people give when they've decided the exchange doesn't matter. Nobody bothers to disagree with a man whose opinion has no consequences. So the pleasant nodding is not respect. It's a sign that you have been quietly moved out of the category of people whose views affect anything. Second, and this is the dangerous one, you stop being corrected. I'm 82. I am wrong about things. I have always been wrong about things, and I was wrong about a great many things at 50. And the difference is that at 50 there was a wife in this house, and a crew on a job site, and a brother-in-law, and 4 or 5 men at a diner who would tell me so. That's gone. Every single one of those channels has closed, either because the people died or because the people got polite. And a man who has never corrected drifts. It happens slowly, and he cannot feel it happening. Because the only instrument for detecting it is other people, and other people have stopped reporting. That's the actual danger of getting old in this country, and it is not the stairs. So, how I handle it. And this one required me to ask, out loud, which I did not enjoy. I have got 3 people whose job it is to tell me I'm wrong, and all 3 of them know it, because I sat down and asked each of them. My son, my daughter, and a woman named Marie who is married to a friend of mine and who has been having lunch with me once a month for years. I asked Susan first about 4 years ago at that kitchen table. I said, I want you to tell me when I'm wrong about something. Not the big things, you tell me about the big things. The ordinary things. When I say something daft, say so. And she looked at me for a second and she said, Pop, are you sure? Which tells you everything about how long it had been. Now she does. And I'd say roughly once every couple of months she'll say something like that's not right, or you're being hard on him, or I don't think that's what happened. And it is the single most valuable thing anybody does for me, and it costs her nothing. And she'd never have started without being asked. With Marie it's different, because she never stopped. That's one of the reasons I have lunch with her. She's 81, and she has never once in her life let a wrong statement go past her. And she is not about to start with me. And with David, my son took longer. He's careful with me, my son. And there's a reason for that, which goes back a good many years. But he's come round, and about a year ago he told me flatly that I was wrong about something to do with the roof. And he was right, and I've thought about that afternoon more than he'd guess. This is what I'd press on anybody past 75. You have to ask. Nobody will start on their own. They've all been trained by the culture, by their own kindness, by watching somebody else's father get upset once, that you don't argue with the old man. And they will go to their graves being pleasant to you unless you specifically release them from it. Ask 3 people. Not everybody 3. Say the words out loud. I want you to tell me when I'm wrong. And then when they do it the first time, do not get shirty about it, because the first time is a test whether either of you means it that way or not. I very nearly failed mine. Susan told me something about how I'd handled a thing with the Sullivans down the road, and I felt it in my chest, and I had about 2 seconds to decide what sort of man I was going to be about it. I said, you may be right about that. That's all I got out. It was not gracious, and I did not feel gracious. But she's been telling me things ever since, and I'd not trade that for 100 pleasant conversations. Now, I want to say what this is actually protecting against, because I've made it sound like a matter of pride, and it is a good deal more practical than that. Every man my age is going to be wrong about something that matters. That's not pessimism, it's arithmetic. Somewhere in the next few years, I will make a judgment about this house, or about the driving, or about what I can still manage on a ladder, and I will be wrong about it, and I will be entirely certain at the time. That is how it goes. I have watched it happen to men I respected enormously, and the only defense against it is other people's mouths. Not their eyes, they'll see it, they see it early, they nearly always do. Their mouths. Somebody has to actually say it out loud to my face, and if I've spent 10 years training everybody around me to be pleasant, there will be nobody in the building willing to do it. So this is not about enjoying a good argument, though I do. It's that I am building, deliberately, a small number of people who are in the habit of contradicting me, so that when the important one comes, the habit is already there, and nobody has to work up to it. I said something like that to my son when I told him about the driving. I said, if Elaine tells you she's seen something, or the fellow at the diner mentions something, you come and tell me, and I'll believe you over myself. That's a strange sentence for a man to say, and I meant every word of it. Because at some point I will be the least reliable witness to my own condition, and the only question that matters is whether the people around me will still be in the habit of speaking up when we get there. There's one more thing about number 4, and it's the part that surprised me. It's improved the conversations enormously. I'd expected it to be uncomfortable. Some of it is. But what I had not expected is that the disagreement is the interesting part. It always was. I'd simply forgotten, because I'd not had any for years. Marie and I had a proper falling out over lunch about 8 months ago. Not a row, a disagreement about whether a thing she'd done about her son was right. And I said so, and she told me I was talking rubbish, and we went at it for the best part of 20 minutes. Best lunch we've had in 4 years. Because for those 20 minutes, neither of us was an old person being handled. We were two people who thought different things about a matter that mattered. I'd not had that since Bob died. 9 years without one genuine argument with anybody outside my own family. And I had put the flatness of my week down to being 82. It wasn't being 82. It was that nobody had argued with me since 2017. Now I'd add the practical form of the asking, because I made it sound simple, and the asking is the hard part. Do not make a speech about it. That's my only instruction, and I got it wrong the first time. When I asked Susan, I gave her about 4 sentences of preamble about respect and honesty and being taken seriously, and I could see her getting worried about where it was going. The version that works is short. I want you to tell me when I'm wrong about something. That's it. And then, and this is the piece I'd not have thought of, give them a small one to practice on. What I mean is, the first time you ask, follow it immediately with something you're plainly wrong about. A small thing. An opinion about a film. A view about somebody's cooking. Anything with no weight in it. Because the difficulty for them is not the principle. It's producing the first one. Nobody wants their first contradiction of their 82-year-old father to be about something that matters. Give them a cheap one to get the mechanism working, and the expensive ones come easier 6 months later. I did that by accident with Marie, and on purpose with David, and it worked both times. And there's one more thing I'd say about number 4 that I've been circling. It gets harder to ask for the longer you leave it. At 75, I could have asked anybody. At 82, the request itself is a bit of an admission. You're saying out loud that you know people have stopped, which means you've noticed, which means there's a conversation to be had about why. At 88, I'd guess it'd be harder again. So if you're anywhere near this and you can still do it lightly, do it now, while it's still a preference rather than a plea. That's true of a good deal at our age. Come to that, and it's about the only general rule I'd stand behind. The things that are worth arranging get harder to arrange every year you don't, and the arranging is nearly always easier than it looks from the year before you do it. Number 5. And this is the last one, and it's the one that actually hurt. They stop telling you things, not opinions. News. Here's what happened, and it's the reason I've made this talk. About 2 years ago, I found out, by accident, from something my granddaughter said in a letter, that my son and his wife had gone through a bad stretch. A serious one. The best part of 8 months of it. Sorting out something between them that I'll not go into because it's theirs and not mine. 8 months. And I had spoken to that man every single Sunday of it. Every Sunday. 52 weeks a year for 9 years, and I have not missed one. And for 30-odd of those Sundays, my son was carrying something enormous and told me about his work and the weather in Portland. I sat with that for about a fortnight before I said anything. And what I felt was not what I expected. I thought I'd be hurt about being left out, and there was some of that. But underneath it was something worse, and it took me the fortnight to find it. They had decided I was no longer somebody you bring a problem to. That's the thing. Not that they wanted privacy, anybody's entitled to privacy and I'd not have pushed. It's that at some point, without any conversation, my son had moved his father from the column of people who help into the column of people you protect. And once a man is in the second column, he does not come out of it by himself. So I rang him. Not on a Sunday, on a Tuesday, which we both understood meant something. And I said the only thing I could think of, which was, I've been a father for 58 years. Don't retire me from it. There was a long pause on that telephone. And he said, and I'll not forget this, he said, "Pop, I didn't want you lying awake." Which is exactly it. That's the whole thing, in one sentence. He was protecting my nights. And what I said back to him was that I'd rather lie awake about something real than sit in this house being comfortable and useless. And that a man of 82 has got a great deal of time in the small hours, and it may as well be spent on something that matters. I don't know that he entirely agreed with me. He's told me two things since that he'd not have told me before, so something shifted. Now here's what I'd say to the sons and daughters, and it's the most important minute in this whole talk. Your father knows, not the details, but he knows something's wrong, because he has known you since you were born, and he can hear it in 4 words on a telephone. So the choice is not between telling him and sparing him. It's between telling him and having him lie awake anyway, with no idea what he's lying awake about. That's the arithmetic, and nobody runs it. Withholding does not remove the worry. It removes the information and leaves the worry exactly where it was. And there's a second thing, and it's the one I'd want understood. Being needed is not a burden at 82. It's very nearly the whole of what's left. I have got a shop, and a house, and 5 people I speak to every week, and a decent life that I built myself out of 9 bad years. But there is nothing in any of it that compares to being the man his son rings on a Tuesday because something's gone wrong. That's the job. I've had it since 1968. It is the last job I've got, and I'd like to keep it until they carry me out of here. And every year that goes by, somebody kind quietly takes another piece of it away from me, because they'd rather I slept well. I'd rather be useful. I'd trade a good deal of sleep for it, and I'm not the only man my age who would, and almost none of us have ever said so out loud. Now, I'd be dishonest if I didn't say the other side, because there is one. Sometimes they're right. There are things I would not have handled well at 74. In the first 2 years after Helen died, I was in no condition to carry anybody else's trouble, and my children knew it. And if they kept things from me in 2018 and 2019, then they were correct, and I'd thank them for it. The trouble isn't that they started protecting me. The trouble is that nobody ever announced the end of it. Protection gets put in place during a bad year, for perfectly good reasons, and then it simply stays. Because nobody schedules a conversation about whether the old man is available again. So he isn't. 5 years after he'd have been perfectly capable of hearing it, he still filed under handle carefully, and the filing was done in a year that's long over. That's what I'd want a son or daughter to hear. If you started protecting your father during a hard stretch, go and check whether the stretch is finished. You don't need a conversation about it. Just tell him something ordinary that's gone wrong in your life and see what he does with it. If he's useless about it, you'll know inside a fortnight, and you can go back to protecting him. And if he's not useless, if he says something you hadn't thought of, or just listens properly the way a father does, then you've got a father again, and you'd not have known unless you tried him. There's a last thing about number 5, and I'll say it plainly, because it's the whole reason this one is last. The news going is the beginning of the end of the relationship, not the affection, the relationship. Because what a relationship actually consists of is two people who know what's going on with each other. Take away the going on, and what's left is a fond arrangement. Regular telephone calls between people who love each other and exchange no information. And that can run for years and look perfectly healthy from outside. I had that with my son for a stretch in there, and neither of us knew. 52 Sundays a year, both of us glad of it, and I could not have told you one true thing about what was happening in that man's life. That is not closeness. That's a habit with warmth in it. Since the Tuesday, it's been different. Not dramatically, he's still a private man, and he's 58, and he'll tell me what he tells me. But he told me about a thing at work in the spring that was genuinely worrying him, and I said something about it. And I don't know that what I said was any use. It doesn't matter whether it was any use. What matters is that at 82 years of age, on a Sunday in April, my son wanted to know what his father thought about something. I'd have paid a great deal for that, and all it cost was one telephone call on a Tuesday and 4 words about not being retired. So, the voice. Being spoken past. The compliments. The agreement. And the news that stops coming. 5 ways it changes, and I'd say the handling of all 5 comes down to about the same thing. You cannot correct people. That's the mistake, and I made it for about 2 years, going about slightly affronted, waiting for somebody to condescend to me so I could resent it. What you can do is give them something different to respond to. Answer in your own voice. Answer the question that was asked about you. Say thank you and then ask them something. Tell 3 people to argue with you. And ring your son on a Tuesday and tell him you're not finished. Every one of those is you moving first. None of them is you being offended. I'm 82 years old, and there's a chest of drawers on the bench out there with a 3rd drawer to fit tomorrow. There are 5 people who will ring this house this week. And every one of them knows my name, and I know theirs. And there is a woman in Boston who tells me when I'm wrong, and a man in Portland who rang me on a Tuesday in March about something he was worried about. That's what I've got, and it took a fair bit of asking. And I'd say the last thing to whoever's just noticed this starting. You cannot win it by being annoyed. There's nobody to be annoyed at. It's 1,000 small kindnesses aimed slightly wrong. What you can do is answer in your own voice and ask them something back, and get 3 people to argue with you, and ring your son on a Tuesday. 4 moves, all of them yours to make. None of them requiring one other person to change anything at all. If what stayed with you is the feeling of being handled rather than talked to, I made another talk about exactly that. About the 5 things you can do that mean nobody has any business pitying you. It's right there on the screen. The kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.